The knock came at 12:40 in the morning, three soft taps that had no business sounding as loud as they did in that silence. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at my phone, watching the numbers change, unable to sleep in heat that felt less like weather and more like punishment. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 32, and up until that heat wave, my life had a kind of order to it that I was quietly proud of. Work, gym, groceries, sleep, predictable in the way that comfortable men mistake for peace. I opened the door already knowing it was Claire because who else would it be? She stood there in the hallway light wearing a thin robe, the kind that wasn't built for hiding much, tied loosely at the waist like she'd thrown it on in a hurry and hadn't thought too hard about it. Her hair was damp at the edges, either from sweat or from splashing water on her face trying to cool down, and her cheeks had that flush look people get when the air itself feels like it's pressing against their skin. "My AC just died," she said, voice low, a little embarrassed. Like, completely. I opened the window, and it's worse outside than in. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Claire was 41, a divorced mother of one, renting the spare room in my place for the past 4 months while she got back on her feet after the divorce finalized. We had an arrangement that worked because neither of us tried to make it complicated. Split utilities, respect each other's space, don't leave dishes in the sink overnight. Simple rules for two adults who had learned the hard way that boundaries save people from themselves. "Your unit's just dead?" I asked, still processing, still very aware that the hallway light was doing her no favors in terms of subtlety. "Dead," she confirmed. "I called the emergency line. They said tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Tomorrow afternoon, Daniel, in this heat." I glanced past her toward her door like I could somehow diagnose the problem from 12 feet away. The truth was, my own room wasn't cold, but it was tolerable, mostly because my unit was newer, installed right before she moved in. The kind of detail that seemed irrelevant right up until it very much wasn't. "You want to sleep in here?" I said. And even as the words left my mouth, I heard how strange they sounded out loud, how they carried a weight neither of us had asked for. She nodded, arms crossing over her chest. Not out of modesty exactly, more like she was bracing for the answer. "Just for tonight. I'll take the floor, I don't care. I just can't do another night like the last one. I was up until 4 sweating through my sheets." I should have said something practical then, something about blankets or the living room couch, some middle ground that kept things clean and uncomplicated. Instead, I found myself just looking at her, at the way the hallway light caught the collarbone exposed where the robe had slipped slightly, at the tired honesty in her eyes that had nothing manipulative in it at all. And somehow that made it worse. She wasn't trying to be anything. She was just hot, exhausted, and standing at my door asking for the one thing that made sense. "Yeah," I said finally. "Yeah, come in." What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known standing there in that doorway at 12:40 in the morning, was how we'd even gotten to a point where this felt normal enough to ask. That part started 4 months earlier with a room for rent sign and a woman who showed up looking nothing like what I expected. "My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 38, and 6 months before that knock, I was a man who had just signed his divorce papers and didn't know what to do with a house that suddenly felt too big for one person. Rachel got the dog, the good couch, and somehow the friends we'd made together, and I got the mortgage and 4 empty bedrooms that used to mean something. My accountant, who moonlights as my conscience, told me the math didn't work anymore. Not on one income, not with the alimony, not with the way I'd been picking up extra shifts just to avoid coming home to silence. So I did what practical people do when pride stops paying the bills. I listed a room. I told myself I wanted a tenant who'd keep to themselves, someone quiet, someone forgettable, someone who wouldn't remind me that I used to share a bed with another human being and now I shared a hallway with a stranger. What I got instead was Claire Bennett, 34 years old, recently divorced herself, with a laugh that filled a room before you even knew what was funny, and a way of looking at you like she'd already decided you were interesting before you'd said a word. She showed up to see the room in a sundress and sandals, and within 10 minutes she'd made a joke about my bachelor art. 3 unframed posters leaning against a wall like they were waiting for a decision I'd never make. "You know picture hooks exist, right?" she'd said. And I remember laughing harder than the joke deserved, mostly out of relief that someone in my house could still make me laugh. She moved in 2 weeks later with 4 boxes and a plant she introduced to me by name, like I was supposed to remember it. We built a rhythm fast. Coffee in the morning, comments about whoever had left dishes in the sink, the occasional glass of wine on the porch when the day had been long enough to deserve one. It was easy in a way that scared me a little, because easy wasn't a word I trusted anymore. There were moments, small ones, that I filed away without looking at too closely. The way she'd rest a hand on my arm when she laughed at something I said. The way I'd notice, more than I should, when she came home from a run in that ridiculous heat, cheeks flushed, tank top clinging in ways that had nothing to do with fashion. Neither of us ever said anything. We were 2 adults who'd already been burned once, and burned people don't go looking for more fire. We kept things friendly, platonic. That was the word we both used, like saying it enough times made it true. Then the heat wave came. The kind the news warned about for a week straight, the kind that turned the whole city into something slow and irritable. Day 4, the power grid started buckling under the strain of every air conditioner in a 50-mile radius fighting the same losing battle. My unit held on. Hers didn't. I didn't know that yet, not at 12:40 in the morning when I was lying in bed, shirt sticking to my chest, staring at a phone screen that offered no comfort and no cooler air. I just knew the house felt different that night. Thicker somehow, like the heat itself was waiting for something to happen. And then came the knock. 3 soft taps, innocent enough on their own. But nothing about that night was going to stay innocent for long. The house had been holding heat since sundown, the kind of heat that sits in the walls like it's paying rent. I'd given up on sleep around 11:30 and just laid there listening to the ceiling fan tick with every rotation, moving air that had stopped being cool sometime around July. My unit was old but stubborn. It wheezed and rattled, but it worked. Claire's, on the other hand, had been making a sound for 3 days that I recognized from every apartment I'd ever lived in before I owned a house. The sound of a machine giving up slowly out of spite. I heard it die completely around midnight. 1 long shudder, then silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence either, or the kind that makes a house feel like it's holding its breath. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Claire was 34, capable, and had made it very clear when she moved into my spare room 4 months ago that she didn't need looking after. She'd said it almost like a warning. I've lived alone before, Daniel. I know how to survive without a man checking on me. Fair enough, I respected that. I stayed in my room, scrolling through nothing, waiting for the heat to break or for exhaustion to finally win. It didn't. At 12:40, I heard her door open down the hall, then close, then open again. Small, hesitant sounds, socked feet on hard wood, pausing, restarting. I recognized the rhythm of someone talking themselves in and out of a decision. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps, deliberate, like she'd practiced not to knock too hard. I sat up, heart doing something stupid and fast for a man who had sworn off surprises 6 months ago. "Yeah?" I said, voice rough with the kind of near sleep that hadn't actually arrived yet. The door opened just enough for her to lean into the frame, robe pulled tight, hair damp at the edges like she'd already tried a cold shower and lost that battle too. The hallway light behind her turned her into more silhouette than person, but I could still see her face, flushed, embarrassed, trying to sound casual and failing. "My AC died," she said. Then, like she needed to justify herself further. Like, actually died. Not making the weird noise anymore, just nothing. "I heard," I said. "Sorry." She laughed, short and awkward. "You heard it die. That's very funny, considering I've been dying in there for the last hour." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which, in hindsight, was probably the worst possible response, because It left silence for her to fill with the next sentence, the one she clearly hadn't planned on saying out loud until it was already out. "Can I sleep in here tonight?" The question landed strange in the heat, stranger in the quiet. Not suggestive, not really, just tired and human. The kind of question you ask when comfort matters more than boundaries. But my brain unhelpfully didn't process it that way first. It processed the robe, the bare feet, the way she was gripping the door frame like she needed something solid to hold on to while she waited for my answer. "There's a couch downstairs," I offered, mostly because it felt like the responsible thing to say. "The couch is right under the attic vent. It's an oven down there." She shifted her weight, glancing away like she'd rehearsed a dozen versions of this conversation and none of them included this much silence. "I just need somewhere with air that doesn't feel like punishment." I looked at her, at the hallway light behind her, at the whole absurd shape of the night, and I realized I hadn't answered yet. Clanked, but it worked, mostly, which was more than I could say for hers. She'd told me through the wall 2 days earlier, half laughing, half serious, that her unit sounded like a dying animal. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Claire Bennett was the kind of neighbor who made small talk about weather and packages, polite in that practiced way people get when they've learned not to need anyone. She was 41, recently divorced herself, though she wore it differently than I did. Where I let mine show in the shape of an empty house, she wore hers like a well-tailored coat. Nothing out of place, nothing unraveling. Or so I thought until that knock. When I opened the door, she was standing there in a thin robe that had clearly been thrown on in a hurry. Her hair damp at the edges, her cheeks flushed from heat or embarrassment. Maybe both. "I'm so sorry," she said, arms crossed, like she was holding herself together. "My AC just died. Completely. I can't sleep in there. It's like an oven." I told her it was fine. Of course it was fine. And stepped aside before I even finished the sentence because what else do you say to a woman standing at your door at midnight looking like she'd rather be anywhere else? She hesitated at the doorway of my room, glancing at the bed, then quickly away like she'd trespassed just by looking. "I'll take the floor," she said, "or the couch. Anywhere. Honestly, I just need air that doesn't feel like breathing through a towel." I told her I had an extra blanket and a pillow that didn't smell like regret, which got the smallest laugh out of her, tired but real. We ended up talking longer than either of us probably meant to, sitting on opposite ends of the room in the dark, the ceiling fan doing its slow, useless work above us. "You know what's funny," she said at one point, staring at the ceiling instead of me, "is that I used to complain about him snoring. Now I'd take snoring over silence." I didn't ask who him was. I didn't have to. There was a particular ache in her voice that I recognized because I owned the same one. "Silence isn't peaceful," she added, quieter. "People say that, but it isn't. It's just loud in a different way." I told her I understood more than I probably should have admitted. And for a second, neither of us said anything, just listened to the fan and the faint hum of the world outside pretending to sleep. When she reached over to adjust the blanket she'd laid on the floor, her hand brushed mine, quick, accidental, but neither of us moved away right away. It was strange how something so small could feel loud in a room that quiet. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's fine," I said, and meant it more than I expected to. She turned onto her side eventually, back to me, but I could tell by her breathing she wasn't asleep, not for a long while. Neither was I. The heat outside hadn't broken, but something in that room had shifted. Some careful wall she kept polished and upright had cracked just slightly, just enough to let a little of the loneliness through. I lay there thinking about how composed she always seemed in the hallway, in the elevator, in every small interaction that meant nothing until now, and how none of that composure had followed her through my door tonight. She'd fallen asleep faster than I expected, given the heat, given the strangeness of the whole night, or at least I thought she had. I was lying there on my back, staring at the same ceiling fan that had been useless for hours, when I felt the mattress shift beside me. Claire had rolled onto her side, facing me, and when I turned my head, her eyes were open. "You're still awake," she said, her voice low, thick with the kind of tiredness that makes people say things they wouldn't say in daylight. "Can't sleep in this," I said. "Never could, even as a kid. My mom used to say I was allergic to summer." She laughed quietly, but it faded fast, and something in her face changed, went softer, more open. "Can I tell you something? And you have to promise not to make it weird." "That's a dangerous thing to promise a divorced guy at 1 a.m. "I mean it, Daniel." She propped herself up slightly on one elbow, and the movement brought her closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her skin, close enough that I could see the faint sheen of sweat at her collarbone catching what little light came through the blinds. I haven't slept next to anyone in almost 2 years. Not like this, not just sleeping. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't trust my voice not to crack the moment, not to turn it into something bigger than it already was. "Why not?" I finally asked. "Because it's easier to be alone than to let someone see you need something," she said. And there was a rawness in it, an honesty that felt like it cost her something to say out loud. But tonight, with the heat, with everything, I don't know, I just didn't want to be alone in that apartment. And I didn't want to lie to myself and pretend that's the only reason I knocked on your door. The room felt smaller then, the air thicker, and it had nothing to do with the broken AC units on either side of that wall. My heart was doing something embarrassing, something fast and stupid, and I found myself leaning in just slightly close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her shampoo, something like vanilla, and something else I couldn't name. She didn't pull back. Her breath caught. I heard it. This small hitch in the dark, and her eyes dropped to my mouth for half a second before coming back up to meet mine. "Claire," I started, not even sure what I was going to say next, whether it was going to be her name and nothing else, or the beginning of something neither of us could take back. That was when my phone lit up on the nightstand, buzzing hard against the wood, the sound obscene in the stillness. We both flinched, like we'd been caught doing something we shouldn't have been doing, which, in fairness, we almost had. I grabbed it without thinking, some instinct from years of late-night emergencies, and saw my sister's name on the screen. Claire pulled back at the same moment, putting distance between us that felt louder than the phone itself. "You should get that," she said, her voice suddenly careful, guarded in a way it hadn't been 30 seconds earlier. "It's probably nothing," I said, but the moment was already gone, dissolved into the dark like it had never happened at all. I answered the call, my hands not quite steady, and Claire lay back down facing away from me, staring at the wall, and neither of us said what we'd almost said, what had been sitting right there between us in the heat, close enough to touch. I woke up before she did, which gave me exactly 4 minutes to panic in silence before Claire's eyes opened and found mine already watching her. 4 minutes to think about Rachel, about the divorce papers still sitting in a folder on my desk, about how fast a person could go from careful to reckless when the house got quiet enough. Claire blinked, registered where she was, who she was next to, and I watched the memory of the night before land on her face in real time. She didn't pull away. That was the first thing I noticed. She didn't do the thing people do in movies, that flinch and scramble for their clothes. She just lay there, studying me the way you'd study a decision you'd already made but hadn't said out loud yet. "So," she said, and her voice was rough with sleep, "we're doing the awkward morning thing now." "We could," I said, "or we could just not." "That's not really how mornings work, Daniel." She was right, of course. The coffee maker in the kitchen didn't care about our feelings. It just gurgled along like any other Tuesday, and the sunlight coming through the blinds was doing that thing where it makes everything look more honest than you want it to. Claire sat up, pulled the sheet around herself. Not out of modesty exactly. More like she needed something to hold on to while she said what she was about to say. "I keep telling myself this was just the heat," she said. "That we were tired and hot and lonely and it didn't mean anything. But I've been lying in this bed for the last 10 minutes trying to convince myself of that, and I can't quite get there." I sat up too. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I've been divorced for 4 months, I said. I got the mortgage and an empty house that echoes. I wasn't looking for anything, Claire. I wasn't even looking for company, half the time. But you knocked on my door in a robe because your AC died, and it's the first time in months I didn't feel like I was renting my own life. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost something else. That's a lot to put on one broken air conditioner. I know how it sounds. No, she said. I know exactly how it sounds because I've been thinking the same thing since 3 in the morning. I moved in here to start over, not to fall for the guy through the wall who complains about his fan not working. I don't complain. You complain constantly. It's very charming. There was a beat where neither of us said anything, where the whole conversation could have tipped back into safety, back into roommates who share a laundry room and nod at each other in the hallway. I felt the pull of that easier version of things, the one where nobody gets hurt because nobody risks anything. But then Claire reached over, took my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world and said, I don't want to pretend this was nothing. I'm tired of pretending things are nothing. Then don't, I said, let's not. That's terrifying, you know. We live 15 feet apart. If this goes wrong, there's no clean exit. There wasn't a clean exit last night either, I said, and you still knocked. She smiled at that, really smiled, the kind that reached her eyes and something in my chest loosened for the first time in months. Okay, she said, then I guess we're doing this, for real, not because of the heat. Not because of the heat, I agreed, and outside the day was already climbing toward another scorcher, but for once I wasn't dreading it. 4 minutes is a long time when you're not breathing right. I lay there counting the ticks of the ceiling fan, watching Claire's face in the gray light coming through the blinds, and I told myself this meant nothing, that a woman rolling over in her sleep wasn't an invitation, wasn't a question, wasn't anything except a body trying to find a cooler patch of sheet. That's what I told myself. It didn't stop my heart from doing something stupid and fast against my ribs. Then her eyes opened. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The fan kept ticking. The room kept holding that thick, heavy heat, and Claire just looked at me like she was deciding something, like she was running the same math I'd been running for 4 minutes straight. I noticed the strap of her robe had slipped further down her shoulder sometime while she slept, and I made myself look at the ceiling instead, at the fan blade that never quite fixed the problem it was built for. Can't sleep either, she whispered. Her voice had that rough, just-woken texture to it. Guess not, I said, and it came out lower than I meant it to. She didn't roll away. That was the part that got me. She stayed there, propped on one elbow, now hair falling loose across the pillow, and for a second the only sound in the apartment was the two of us breathing in a room that felt smaller than it had an hour ago. I thought about Rachel then, unwillingly, the way you think about a bruise you keep pressing just to feel it. I thought about the folder on my desk in the next room, the papers I hadn't signed yet, sitting there like a countdown I'd been ignoring for 3 weeks. And here I was, lying in bed with my neighbor at midnight because her air conditioner had died, telling myself this was just decency, just being a good person in a heat wave. You're staring, Claire said, and there was a smile behind it, small and knowing. Sorry. Long day. Long month, probably, she said, and I didn't know how much she knew about the papers, about Rachel, about any of it, but something in the way she said it made my chest tighten anyway. We lay there a while longer, not talking, the heat pressing down on both of us like a blanket neither of us had asked for. At some point her hand found the edge of my pillow, not touching me, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her skin, and I stared at that hand like it might answer a question I hadn't asked out loud yet. This is a bad idea, I finally said, mostly to the ceiling. Which part? Claire asked. The bed or the staring? I didn't answer. She didn't push, but she also didn't move her hand. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere down the block, cutting through the stillness, and it broke whatever strange gravity had settled over the room. Claire blinked, looked away first, and rolled onto her back with a small exhale that sounded like relief and disappointment tangled together. I stared at the fan again, willing it to move faster, to cool something, anything. I should probably go back to my place, she said quietly, though she didn't move. Even if it's a furnace. You don't have to, I said, before I could stop myself. The silence that followed felt different than the one before it. Heavier. Closer. And somewhere under the ceiling fan's useless ticking, I understood that whatever this heat wave had started, it wasn't finished yet. Find comfort. That's what I told myself that morning. And for a while, I almost believed it. But 4 minutes is long enough to lie to yourself about a lot of things and short enough that the truth still finds you before you're ready for it. It's been 8 months since that heat wave broke. The air conditioner in Claire's unit got fixed about a week later. Some part the landlord had to special order. And I remember the exact moment the repair guy told her it was done. She looked almost disappointed. I laughed about it, called her out on it, and she just shrugged and said, "I got used to your fan." That was as close as either of us came to naming what had already started happening between us. We didn't rush it. That's the part people don't believe when I tell them the story now, my sister especially, who still gives me that look like she's waiting for the punchline. We didn't fall into bed and call it love the next morning. It took weeks of coffee in the kitchen we shared, of her knocking on my door with some flimsy excuse about borrowing sugar or asking if I'd heard a noise outside, of me finding reasons to be in the hallway when I knew she'd be coming home from work. Small things. Careful things. The divorce papers finally got signed in October, and Claire was the one who sat with me the night before, not saying much, just being there, which somehow mattered more than any speech would have. She moved into my apartment in December. We didn't make a big announcement out of it. Her lease was up. Mine had 2 years left, and it made sense financially, practically, in every reasonable way a person could justify falling for their neighbor. But we both knew reason had very little to do with it. I watched her unpack her books onto my shelves, watched her rearrange my kitchen into something that finally made sense. And I remember standing in the doorway thinking that this ordinary domestic chaos felt more like a home than anything Rachel and I had built in 6 years of marriage. Sometimes at night, when the apartment's quiet and Claire's asleep beside me, I think back to that heat wave, to the knock on my door, to her standing there in that robe, asking if she could sleep in here tonight like it was nothing, like it wasn't about to unravel everything I thought I understood about starting over. I think about the ceiling fan, still creaking the same tired rhythm above us, the only witness to how two people who'd been careful their whole lives finally let themselves be reckless in the best possible way. Claire says the heat wave saved her that summer. I tell her it did a lot more than that. It gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. The simple, unglamorous comfort of sharing a life with someone who actually wants to be there. Not out of convenience, not out of loneliness, but because somewhere between the broken air conditioner and 4 minutes of silent panic, we found something worth keeping. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't really a story about the heat. It's about what happens when two guarded people finally stop pretending they don't need anyone. If that's the kind of story you like, you know what to do. Hit subscribe because trust me, this isn't the last one worth hearing.